Hello, today is Thursday, February 1st, 2024. I'm Tony Mangino from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. I'm joined today by my colleagues, David Lee, TC2's Technology Director, and Steve Rosen, a partner at LB3. Today on Staying Connected, we continue our ongoing discussion of enterprise use of private 5G networks in general, and enterprise use of CBRS in particular. So let's start with the Citizens Broadband Radio Service, or CBRS. This service is beginning to reach maturity as the General Authorized Access Licensees, the GAA, were permitted to go on the air in 2020, and the Priority Access Licenses, or PALs, were auctioned in September 2020, with licenses issued through October 2022. With that in mind, Steve, can you tell us how users perceive the service from a business point of view?
Hi, Tony. Good to be speaking with you again. Your question is timely because during our last podcast on this topic in mid-December, we identified impacts that may cause an outage for the CBRS service. For example, if there's a lack of CBRS radio connectivity to the SAS administrator, or if a federal government user needs that spectrum temporarily for a few days for emergency purposes, the users of CBRS will not be able to transmit. The Commerce Spectrum Management Advisory Committee, CSMAC, formed a CBRS subcommittee to review CBRS services and solicit feedback. The CSMAC advises NTIA on a broad range of spectrum policy issues, and its members are from outside the federal government. Subsequent to our podcast, the CBRS subcommittee issued a report on lessons learned from the implementation of CBRS. Participants in the recent report included government stakeholders, CBRS operators, SAS providers, and equipment manufacturers.
Interesting, and certainly a lot of acronyms there. Did the report mention this potential for outages and other issues you mentioned in the last podcast? What were the report's summary conclusions?
Well, it's not a government report without acronyms, Tony. As a business matter, the CBRS operators were divided. Operators that were using CBRS to provide wide area service or a service covering a city were frustrated by their inability to ensure uninterrupted transmissions due to CBRS's conservative technical thresholds and regulatory quirks. On the other hand, CBRS operators that were using CBRS to provide service in discrete areas, such as factories or office parks, were more satisfied. For example, a vendor for smaller private wireless operators indicated that it had, quote, more flexibility in meeting customers' unique security and other network control requirements through the CBRS framework, given that a private wireless network can be directly integrated into enterprise networks, close quote. However, there was agreement among all the categories interviewees that the NTIA processes for coordinating with government spectrum users, collaboration with other agencies, and improvement programs for CBRS could move along much faster.
Technical and regulatory quirks, huh? That doesn't sound promising. Dave, as a ham radio operator, can you explain the technical issues that make some CBRS users, especially those that want to operate over large areas, less than satisfied?
Hey, Tony. Again, nice speaking with you and Steve. The biggest technical issue raised in the CSMAC report is that the power and propagation limitations are too stringent to provide a truly robust enterprise-level service. The allegation is that the FCC was too conservative in limiting power and assuming broad propagation characteristics when it set the CBRS service rules and sought to protect other radio services. As noted in the report, quote, the single most frequent recommendation among respondents was to improve propagation modeling. A very wide range of entities representing the government, both traditional and new entrant commercial wireless companies, fixed wireless companies, equipment manufacturers, and an academic expert stated that current propagation models would benefit from being updated. Respondents recommended that more accurate propagation modeling should account for terrain, clutter, and other factors, end quote. By accounting for terrain, clutter, and other factors, the service rules would allow operators to transmit at higher power levels and ensure broader propagation of their signals. Respondents went so far as recommending well-known ITU standards that the FCC could have used.
Got it. So the CBRS operators and enterprises would like to turn up the power so they can provide better service to their customers and end users. Steve, what are the regulatory issues that seem to be slowing down the uptake of CBRS?
The regulatory issues all arise out of the fact that CBRS spectrum is shared and the incumbent government users, including operators of Navy radars, have priority. Therefore, where incumbent users are transmitting on their frequencies, other users are often required to cease or curtail their operations. This is particularly problematic in coastal areas where there are more incumbent government users. Unfortunately, our population centers also tend to be in coastal areas, so government use of CBRS spectrum can be quite impactful on other users.
Well, that sounds like a big no bueno if you are relying on a CBRS network for mission critical traffic. So, David, is CBRS useless for enterprise users?
No, I certainly would not go so far as to say that CBRS is not useful to enterprises, Tony. And as this is a radio or wireless service, the question about usefulness really comes down to location, location, location. In our last podcast on Amazon's private 5G service, which actually uses CBRS and the GAA license type, we did mention that for CBRS radios near incumbent federal users or inside of specially designated dynamic protection areas or DPA neighborhoods, there's another acronym, there can be an issue which enterprises should be aware of if they are or their system integrator are planning to deploy CBRS within a DPA. If an enterprise is using CBRS for mission-critical applications, there should be more planning and analysis. For example, the enterprises will be well advised to engineer mesh Wi-Fi as a backup for parts of the solution that absolutely cannot fail. One example of the need for such backup would be factory robotics or safety systems. The last thing you want is a 10-ton industrial crane seizing in mid-operation due to a wireless blackout. But I believe this forced outage with respect to CBRS is a short-term issue, as CBRS is a new service and its operational and regulatory quirks are just beginning to come to light. We expect will be addressed by the marketplace. Interestingly, a federal user commented that the NTIA and FCC need to address these issues so that they can fix or risk CBRS users and equipment manufacturers going to the media, again, with their stories. This reminds me of the podcast we did, Steve, some months ago when the FCC got some bad press on their issues with 5G and interference with radio altimeters.
Understood, Dave. So, smart network planners can engineer around the current weaknesses of CBRS. Steve, given these potential operational issues, what has the market said about this technology?
Well, Tony, the trade reports are mixed. I've read reports stating that private 5G networks will not reach their potential. These reports seem to come mostly from large network operators such as wireless carriers and express their underlying frustration with the lack of resiliency inherent in shared spectrum services like CBRS. On the other hand, the manufacturing sector remains enthusiastic about private 5G networks and CBRS, perhaps largely because of the need to implement automated wireless Internet of Things applications in their laboratories and factories. The use case is just too strong. And small operators and systems integrators are also quite enthusiastic about private 5G networks and CBRS because spectrum is available either for free on a GAA basis or for considerably less than commercial 5G spectrum.
Thanks, Steve. It sounds like the full story is yet to be told. Dave, any final thoughts on the subject?
Sure. I would say that CBRS continues to be a work in progress. However, if we review the last 20 years of Wi-Fi technology, which is unlicensed spectrum and with no frequency coordination among users, technically users encounter interference and performance issues all the time. But through the use of network protocols and better modulation techniques over these last 20 years, the user or device never notices it. Similarly, CBRS will also evolve, and the frequency sharing processes and limitations imposed on users and equipment makers will be improved.
Okay, thanks, Dave. It's really interesting stuff here today. Thanks to both of you for joining me today. CBRS and private 5G are compelling services for business applications, and it doesn't surprise me that there are various regulatory considerations to be mindful of. If you'd like to learn more about private enterprise 5G, or you have other ICT needs, you can contact me, Dave, Steve, or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues by giving us a call or shooting us an email. You can also stay up to date by subscribing to Staying Connected, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.